Good morning. Happy Easter. Christ is risen. Um, this is April 17th. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school class. We are starting the book of Exodus this week after 2 years in Genesis. But Exodus won't take as long. Um, let's begin. And welcome. Thank you for listening. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. What do these books, what's the story? I remember years ago having trouble distinguishing, like, what's the difference in these books? They seem to be kind of telling the same story. Exodus tells the story of Israel's extraction from bondage. Eh, In fact, there's a key verse in Exodus, in Leviticus, in Numbers, and in Deuteronomy. They each have like a key verse that kind of explains what the whole book is about. Exodus chapter 20, verse 1 and 2 says, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage." That's what the whole chapter is about God introducing himself to these people. Um, hey, Susie. So, reacquainted. Um, they make it all the way up to Mount Sinai. God gives them the Ten Commandments in the book of Exodus, where he's trying to explain, this is who I am, this is how you have to live. Because they'd never been a people under God. They were a people in Egypt, and they were learning all the Egyptian customs and all the Egyptian ways of thinking. And so God's like, you need to die to all of that, and you need to be reborn to this new way of thinking. So God's introducing himself to the people of Israel in the book of Exodus. He gives them the Ten Commandments. Like, for example, don't kill people. And they're like, what? Thou shalt not steal. Don't steal. I mean, these are like, God blew my mind today. He said I shouldn't commit adultery. Because in Egypt, that's not what they lived by, and that's not what they had learned for the past couple hundred years in Egypt, right? In the book of Leviticus, then he says we're going to build a temple. I'm going to create a temple. It actually traveled with them. It was tents that they put up. It was a traveling temple. And the book of Leviticus is all about the laws of the temple, what's supposed to go on inside the temple, and how to consecrate yourself to the Lord. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. In Numbers, the book of Numbers is everything that happened after that. The 40 years where they wandered in the wilderness. Exodus doesn't cover the 40 years that they wandered in the wilderness. It just covers when they went up to Mount Sinai and sinned, basically. Leviticus is, here's how to consecrate yourself to the Lord. Numbers is, here's everything that happened during that 40-year period. And Deuteronomy, they're about to now go to the promised land. Um, And so let's recap everything that we've learned and prepare ourselves, because now after 40 years, you're ready to go into the promised land. So they're chronological books. So Exodus covers the extraction. It's appropriate for today because today what Jesus did on the cross, we celebrate, and it extracts us from our sin. It's the way out of our bondage, right? What he did for us on the cross. So, hey, Carol. Um, so, um, the book of normally these books, interestingly enough, begin after a death. So someone's been in power, and now there's a new regime about to take place. Like in Joshua chapter 1, it says, after the death of Moses, Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, now you're in charge. So this book of Joshua, now that Moses is dead, we're starting a new chapter. In the book of Judges, chapter 1, verse 1, it says, now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, well, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? So now that Joshua's dead, who's it? So the book of Exodus basically follows in a similar pattern. Who is going to go up, Hello, Joey. Who's going to go up against us? I mean, who's going to lead us now that Joseph is dead? What's now that Joseph is dead? What's and basically the answer is going to be Moses. So let's start with Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob." So he's just recapping. Let's who's in Israel I mean, who's in Egypt at this time? Who came to Egypt with Jacob? And he's about to list all their names. I do want to stop on this word. He says each man and his household, because he's about to tell us 70 people who came um, with Jacob, but each of the sons had a household of servants. So more than 70 people came. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 14, it says, "Now when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive," now even though they use the word brother, he really means nephew. There's a word that they use that sometimes meant brother, sometimes meant nephew. There's a word that they use that meant son, that meant grandson. So you kind of have to look at the context of the scripture to figure out, how should I translate this word? I don't know why they translated this word brother, because it was definitely his nephew. Lot is his nephew. So I don't, interesting. Um, but so now when Abram heard that his nephew was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as the city of Dan. Now, it wasn't called Dan at the time. It wasn't called Dan until they came back 400 years later, and then they started naming cities after themselves. But for the purpose of the reader's understanding, Moses is writing this out, and he went as far as Dan so they'd know where Dan was. Um, anyway, um, he had 318 people in his household. So it was just one Abraham, his wife Sarah. They didn't have any kids yet. And he has 318 people. We're assuming that each son had at least 50 people in his household, 50 servants. And then those servants have kids, etc. So some may have had up to 75. Abraham had 300 and something, so who knows? Because it says each man came and his household. And that meant his servants and everything. So when they came down, there could have been 500 or more, up to 1,000 of them who came down. But just 70 sons are mentioned, right? Okay. So, but even if there's 70 sons and 10 of them each of them have 10 people in the household, that's 700. But like I said, they could have 50, could have had 100. There could have been 7,000 people who came down with Jacob. So these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man in his household came with Jacob. And it's the same list from Genesis chapter 26. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and Issachar, Zebulun. So first he lists Rachel. They list Leah's kids because they were born first. Then it says, and Benjamin. Now they don't list Joseph and Benjamin. They came from Bilhah, his other wife. Rachel, his other wife. They don't list Joseph because Joseph was already there. So just say, and Benjamin. Then they do Bilhah's, Rachel's maids, kids, Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah's maids, her kids, Gad and Asher. So we list all 11 of them. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Now, in Genesis chapter 6, they named the kids too because each of them had kids with them. So they said Reuben and then his kids, and Issachar and his kids, and Simeon and his kids. So there's 70 altogether. Now there's this thing about 70. It wasn't exactly 70. It was close to 70, or it was over 70. 70 is a round number. We use round numbers ourselves. We'll say there was a 1,000,000-man march. Well, no one counted and that there was exactly 1,000,000. There could have been 900,000, or there could have been 1,000,006. We just say 1,000,000. 1,000,000 people showed up. Well, they had 1,000,000 people. That's just our phrase that we use. That signifies it was a whole bunch of people. So in our culture, whenever you say 1,000,000, we used to say that same thing about money. He's a millionaire. Now, he might have more than 1,000,000, or almost, but we just use millionaire. Million means a whole bunch, and 70 meant a whole bunch. Stephen says 75 people came down. When you count up the list, looks like it's 67. Anyway, 70 is a nice round number. It just meant a complete list. I say this because in Genesis, I think chapter 10, they list all the nations that came. It's the table of nations. Noah had 3 kids, and from his 3 kids, they list all the nations. Shem had these nations, came from him, and Ham had these, and Japheth had these, and we know that Japheth was the father that went into Europe, and Shem was Middle East on to the Far East, and Ham was those who went to Africa and South America, and there's 70 nations listed. Like that's the complete number. There's 70. Jesus and his disciples. He has 12 disciples, and then there were 70 people that followed him. So that there's this whole thing about 70. 70s, and actually it says 72, but they like to say 70 because like we say million. We don't say he was a millionaire plus $7. Okay, so it says all those were descendants of Jacob's were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. Yes, he was in Genesis 46, in the list that they gave in Genesis 46, chapter 27. It says, and the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons. And all the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. But really it was 67 if you count the list. So they're kind of counting Joseph as 68 and his 2 sons as 69 and 70. Okay. And Joseph died. So again, new books of the Bible in the Old Testament happened. Once this person died, now we've got a whole new book. And Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. So Jacob showed up with his sons and his grandsons. And that generation of obviously Jacob had died, but finally Joseph died and his brothers, that whole generation. Joseph was one of the youngest. He was the 11th of 12. So by the time he died, his brothers had already died. So he says that whole generation is gone. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. These terms, they were fruitful and they multiplied. He's using it on purpose to designate whenever there's a new beginning and they begin to increase and spread the land. They're taking that, he's taking this phrase right from like Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. When he's talking about Adam and Eve, it says, then God blessed them and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So it's the idea of you're the parents of this whole huge generation, this whole huge thing that's going to grow from you. In Genesis chapter 8, after the flood, same language. Genesis chapter 8, verse 17. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you. Birds, cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so they may abound on the earth. So you put inside the ark these animals, bring them out with you, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth, because you're the new beginning. This is the new beginning of the new family of God. Family. Okay. So he's using the same, even though that first generation had died. He's using the same, that first generation did, but this next generation came and they were fruitful and they multiplied in Egypt. It's like they're giving birth to a whole new family. How many people eventually were in Egypt before the Exodus began and before God took them out? In Exodus chapter 12, verse 37, it says, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses. So Ramesses was a city that they built, named after the Pharaoh, Ramses, to Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. So there's 600,000 men. So let's assume there's 600,000 women. So it's about 1 million people that are leaving there. Many of them are direct descendants, blood descendants of Jacob and Judah and Levi and that whole group. And a lot of them are just members of their household. Because again, remember, Abraham, there was 2 of them, but he had 300 people in his household. So by the time their time in Egypt is over, there's 600,000 men. probably 600,000 women. That would make sense, at least. So there's at least 1 million people who are leaving. So that's a lot. Talking about being fruitful and multiplying. Okay. Uh, so how many generations? This is a big. How long were they in Egypt? They were in Egypt 215 years. But some scriptures say 430 years. Well, half of that time. The other half happened before they got to Egypt. God came to Abraham and says, "You and your descendants will be strangers, servants, and slaves in the land." They added extra words. You'll be strangers in the land, and then you will also be servants, and then you will also be slaves, as though these were happening uh, in one place. He's saying you're going to be strangers, servants, then slaves. And it'll be 430 years, basically, from now until then. You and your descendants. So some of that happened in Canaan. They were strangers in Canaan. And some of that happened in Egypt. So we can calculate exactly how long they were there. Joseph, in Genesis 41:46, it says, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So Joseph, remember, was sold into slavery. He's 30. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through. So he's 30. Now, Jacob was 130 years old when he got to Egypt, when Joseph brought his father. So Jacob's 130 years. Isaac was 40 years old when Jacob was born. So Isaac was 40 years old when he had his twins, Jacob and Esau. And then from the time that Abraham got that promise, so that's 40 plus 130 is 170. That promise happened 15 years before Isaac was born. So it was 15 years, so that's 185 years. So we know it was 430 total years, and 215 of it was spent in Egypt. 215 years in Egypt. Well, that would make 400 years. We know that it was 400 total years. I keep saying, I don't know. But 15 was 215 years in Egypt. That's a long time in Egypt, 215 years, but not 430 years. It's just 215 years, and there were 4 generations that were born there. In fact, God told Abraham, your people will come out after 4 generations. So there are 4 generations that were born in Egypt. 70 people, except probably 700, came down with Jacob, 70 of his own children, and then they each had servants and all that. 4 generations are born in Egypt, and then they go. For example, we know this because Levi was one of Jacob's sons. In Genesis chapter 46, verse 11, where they're listing everybody who showed up, they said the sons of Levi were Gershon and Kohath and Merari. So Levi, who eventually his line became the priest, he has 3 sons, Gershon and Kohath. Again, if you see any Cohens today, Cohen, they're direct descendants from Levi and Aaron and Moses. They're direct from that line, right? Okay. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. In Exodus chapter 6, verse 18, it says the sons of Kohath were Amram, and that's the name you want to remember, Amram, Ishar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And the years of the life of Kohath were 133. Now Amram, in verse 20, took for himself Jochebed. So you got Levi shows up with his son Kohath. Kohath has Amram. Amram takes for his wife Jochebed, his father's sister, which is really interesting. That's his aunt. So she must have been a lot younger than the father, we're assuming, his dad. So he takes his aunt as his wife, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. So we've got Levi, his kids are Kohath. Kohath has Amram, and Amram has Aaron and Moses. And now they're on their way out. That's 4 generations. And now they're on their way out. So they're about there 215 years, 4 generations, and then they're gone. The Reuben line, you can look at the Reuben line. Reuben is Jacob's oldest son. In Genesis 46:9, again, chapter 46 of Genesis is all these people. Here's all 70, but it's really 67. The sons of Reuben were Hanok and Palu. Palu's the name we want to remember. Hezron and Carmi. In Numbers chapter 26, verse 8, it says the sons of Palu were Eliab. So Reuben, the oldest son of Jacob, has Palu. Then Palu has Eliab. And sons of Eliab were Nemuel, Dothan, and Abiram. Now, Dothan and Abiram, these were the ones who challenged Moses in the wilderness along with Korah. Oh, in fact, it says that, and then I just kept reading the verse. These are the Dathan and Abiram, representatives of the congregation, who contended against Moses and Aaron in the company of Korah when they contended against the Lord. So Reuben's the oldest son. He showed up with Palu. Palu had Eliab. Eliab had Dathan and Abiram. And then they're the ones challenging Moses in the wilderness. So it's 4 generations. Judah had Nishon. He was his descendant, his great-grandson, that was in the wilderness with Moses. The sons of Judah in Genesis 46, that same chapter that lists all the sons of Judah were and Onan and Shelah. So if you remember Judah's story, was supposed to marry Tamar, but he didn't, so he died. Onan was supposed to marry Tamar, but he didn't, so he died. Shelah was supposed to marry Tamar, but he didn't. Now God didn't kill him. Judah just forgot about Shelah, and so Judah ended up having a child by Tamar. He had Perez and Zerah. It says, but and Onan died in the land of Canaan. So and Onan never made it down to Egypt. Perez did, and Shelah even made it down. But Judah had a child with Tamar. He had Perez. And it says the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. And we can go to Matthew chapter 1 to get that line. And Matthew chapter 1 verse 3 says, Judah begat Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begat Hezron. Hezron begat Ram. And Ram begat Abinadab. And Abinadab begat Nashon. In this case, there's 5 generations. I don't know why. Everybody else had 4 generations of kids. Judah had 5 generations of kids. Nashon was a general under Moses. In Numbers chapter 10, verse 14. Now, again, the book of Numbers is what happens after Mount Sinai. Book of Exodus happens everything up until the 10 Commandments. Book of Numbers covers the 40 years while they're in the wilderness wandering around. So Numbers chapter 10, verse 14, it says, the standard of the camp of the children of Judah set out first. So this is when they're leaving Mount Sinai and they're going to begin wandering around. And it says, according to their armies, over their army was Nashon, the son of Amminadab. So Nashon, 5 generations later, is in the wilderness, 215 years. He's with Moses, following his commands. Here's just one little interesting note. In Exodus chapter 6, verse 23, talking about Aaron. Now, Aaron's from the tribe of Levi. Nashon is from the tribe of Judah. It says, Aaron took to himself Elisheba, who's the daughter of Abinadab, the sister of Nashon. So, Aaron's brother-in-law is Nashon. Nashon is from the line of Judah. Aaron is from the tribe of Levi. So, Elisheba and Aaron have kids. And she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar. Those first priests who came from Aaron and his wife are half Levi, half Judah. Jesus comes from that line, and he was always part Levi, part Judah. And Jesus' mother, Mary, her mother is from the tribe of Levi, her father's from the tribe of Judah. And so Jesus is both descending from King David and priest Aaron. He's from both. That's why he's able to walk into the temple as king and priest and turn over the tables and do all the things he did. Because the tribe of Judah and Levi had been mixing for a long time. Now, just because it's always interesting to my wife, to go on in Matthew, where it says that Judah begat Perez, and Perez begat Hezron, and then there's Ram and Abinadab, and then Nashon, again, 5 generations instead of 4 for some reason. It says Nashon begat Salmon, and Salmon begat Boaz by Rahab. So again, this is the line of Jesus, and Rahab is right. Tamar, who sat by the road and pretended to be a prostitute, she's right in Jesus's line. Rahab, the harlot, right in Jesus's line. His great 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 grandmother, and because and that's on purpose, right? She repented. She marries into Judah's line, and God doesn't, He's looking at your heart, right, not your life. And Boaz begat Obed and by Ruth, so Ruth right in Jesus' line. Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king. So David's great grandmother is Rahab the harlot. So anyway, there are four generations, except for Judah for some reason, five, in Egypt. 215 years in Egypt, 185 years in Canaan. They're strangers, then servants, then slaves, which is what God said would happen to them. Now, verse 8 says, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And literally did not know Joseph. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. That is because the Hyksos dynasty had moved down a couple hundred years earlier. They had migrated. They're from the Syria, Turkey area. They're nomads, and they drifted down into Egypt and were living there for many years, and they eventually took over Egypt. And so this king that was there when Joseph showed up was a Semite. He was of the same race, I'll say race, family group as the Israelites. And so he had no problem with them having sheep and cattle and all that stuff because he wasn't really Egyptian. He was the Pharaoh at the time, but his family wasn't born there. So he had no problem with Joseph and all that they were doing. And yeah, bring your family down because we're from the same area. Abraham is from that same area that they were from, the Hyksos were from. So yeah, just come on down. In fact, live in Goshen and everything will be great. Okay, that was the 18th dynasty of Egypt. The 19th dynasty of Egypt is Ramesses. He takes over. He's actually is Egyptian, and they didn't have any dealings with Joseph and them. So this is a whole new regime. It's not just a new king; it's a whole new people. The Hyksos were kicked out, and the Egyptians took back their ownership of their kingdom, and they didn't know these people, and so. In fact, they're afraid of them simply because you're different than us. We do the same thing in America. They do that in every country. And so he says to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we are. Now, I don't know if they were mightier, but that's how it looked. And that's how it looks when we're scared of people coming from another country. Oh my God, they're going to take over. Because they're not us. And so what else would they? Of course, they're going to take over. And so they're not us. So they're mightier than us. And he starts spreading this and getting everyone in Egypt fearful of these people who've been living there for a long time, not doing anything, not bothering anybody, just working in the fields and doing their thing. But suddenly they've been turned into the enemy. These people are the enemy. We hate them. Okay. So come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us. So why they're afraid of their enemies were the people from up north in Syria. Those are their enemies from Canaan. And they're thinking they're related to them. These Israelites, they're related to those people. So if we ever get attacked, won't they just join with those people? We did something similar, and every country does it. I'm not picking on America. I'm just saying humans have been humans forever. So things you read in the Bible, we do those same things. So we had the Japanese living in our midst during World War II, and the thought was, well, if Japan attacks these Japanese who've been living here for 100 years, they'll join with them and they'll attack us. So we've got to put them in prison camps. And that's just the thought, they're not really us. So naturally they'll join with our enemies. So that's his fear that he's spreading. We've got to do something about them, even though they've been here for a couple hundred years, minding their business. I can make you scared of them. And so he does. If we get attacked, they're going to join with the enemy. So, and fight again and go. So therefore, verse 11, They set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramesses. So that's when the city of Ramses was built. In the 19th dynasty, he named the city after himself as supply city. We're just going to build cities where we can build storehouses and food and supplies for our armies and all this stuff to, put them to work. This will somehow tire them out, and they'll go home and they'll stop having children because they're having a bunch of children, and we got to stop them from having children. So we'll just work them so hard that when they get home, they won't feel like it. Did that work? I don't know. No, surprisingly, it didn't work. Okay, Israel. Well, actually, King Solomon tried a similar thing. We're going to put these people to work. Of course, he did it against his own people. It's very interesting. When King Solomon went to build up his palace and his houses and the temple of the Lord and all these other things, he started doing the same tactics. And it's funny, sometimes we learn the tactics of our oppressors and we do it to our own people. In 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 13 through 15, it says, Then King Solomon raised up a labor force out of all Israel, and the labor force was 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. He would just, you'd be there every third month, and you'd live there in Lebanon, and you'd chop down trees and bring them back, the cedars of Lebanon. You'd bring them back so that he could build all of his stuff that he wanted to build. They were 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram, remember that name. Adoniram was in charge of the labor force. Okay, so Adoniram was in charge. He put Adoniram in charge. In 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 15, it says, And this is the reason for the labor force which King Solomon raised, to build the house of the Lord. Oh, that sounds good. He was building the house of the Lord. He's building a temple. God told him to do that. His own house, so he just built a palace for himself. The Milo, the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megador, Gezer. He just started building cities all over the place where there were no cities. He's just building. He's just putting them, he's killing them because he's just putting them to work, and they'd be gone for a month at a time, and you get to rest, and you're going to run, and he's just rotating them for years. Pharaoh, now here's why he's building some of these places, because it says, this is the reason, 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 15. Here's the reason. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now this is in the year like 900 BC. So this is 400 years after the other Pharaoh. This is a new Pharaoh, obviously, 400 years later. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gezer, and he burned it with fire, and had killed all the Canaanites who dwelt in the city, and then had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. Here, Solomon, I want you to marry my daughter, and I know that I can't just give her to you. She's got to have money and all this stuff. So I'm going to go to that city. I'm going to burn it down. I'm going to kill everybody in it, and then give it to you, as my daughter's dowry. And Solomon goes, oh, thank you. I don't mind all the people were killed. That's no problem. I'll just send my people in, and they'll rebuild the city. So they were rebuilding cities that Solomon and the Pharaoh had burned down. They're just rebuilding cities for no reason. So Solomon built Gezer. He built Lower Beth Hezron, it says in verse 17, and Baalath and Tabor in the wilderness in the land of Judah. In the desert, they started building cities. He's just putting people to work as slave labor, which is the same thing that happened to his people 400 years earlier. It says all the storage cities that Solomon had, cities for chariots, cities for his cavalry. So he built a whole city just to store his chariots, a city just for his horses, for his cavalry. And whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion, he just built like building a whole city for your shoes. Those people who have like closets just for the shoes, which is really fantastic. He built a whole city just for, his horses. All right. In 1 Kings chapter 12, his son is taken over. Solomon is dead. Now Rehoboam is charged. And they said, please don't do to us what Solomon did. Solomon almost killed all of us, putting us to work so hard and make slave labor. And Rehoboam said, oh no, I'm going to do double, make it even worse. So verse 18, it says, then King Rehoboam sent Adoram. Now remember, this is the guy that Solomon had put in charge of all this building, who was in charge of the revenue But all Israel stoned him with stones, and he died. That's how happy they were about it. They killed the guy who was in charge because they were so unhappy. Like, I can't believe you're making a slave labor. Rehoboam sent him down there. Yeah, he'll take cover again, and they killed him. Like, no, no, he won't do that to us again. And says, therefore, King Rehoboam mounted his chariots in haste to flee to Jerusalem. So, oh, these people are crazy. So Israel had been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. So that was the last straw. When Rehoboam continued that slave labor, that's it. That's it. And it says they've been in rebellion to the house of David to this day. And First Kings was written in 550 or so BC, about 400 years after this. And he said it's been 400 years, and it's never been repaired because Rehoboam went too far. Solomon started it. Really, Pharaoh started it, but Solomon said, "Oh, that's a good thing to do to my people." So Pharaoh is putting them under slave labor. He's treating them horribly, but his goal is to stop them from having kids. Verse 12, going back to Exodus chapter 1, says, "But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew." And so we can't stop what God is doing. You just can't stop what God is doing. The devil can't stop it. We get nervous. Oh no, look what the devil's doing. That's not going to stop God. You can't stop. God's not hoping things will work out. God's already seen the future. Hey, Melita, and he's already seen it and knows what's going to happen. God's not telling us, okay, I want you to go down there and hopefully God doesn't have his fingers crossed. Like, yeah, he knows what's going to happen. So the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel because their Pharaoh had whipped up this hatred for them. So, phase 2, the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, which means he just doubled it and made it painful. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar and brick and all manner of service in the field, thinking, we'll just increase it. Phase 2, we'll just make it so hard. All the service in which they made them service with rigor, and that word just means with bitterness, with pain, right? That we may use it a little differently now, but that's how they used it then. Verse 15, I'm sorry, in chapter 1. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, because that didn't stop them. So he's, okay, here's plan number 3. I'll speak to the Hebrew midwives. Now, these were Hebrew midwives. People think that they were Egyptian midwives who worked for the Hebrews, but they were Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. These are Hebrew names, so we know that they were Hebrew midwives. He stupidly comes to them, and he says, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on their birth stools, okay, so when they're ready to give birth, they're just about to give birth, you put them on a specific device that so they can, and again, they would sit down and give birth downward. Okay, so when you see them on the birth of, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. So when you're there, if the son comes out, kill him. If it's a daughter, let him live. This is phase 3 of I'm going to stop these Israelites from multiplying. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children. Now, even though they mentioned just these are the 2 heads of them. This is not, there are only 2 midwives running around for everybody. But they were the ones in charge of the other midwives. And you usually became a midwife if you were barren, if you had no children of your own, then you would just help other women give birth. So that was tradition at that time. That's not the tradition today, but that's the tradition at that time. So the midwives feared God, did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? Because I'm looking around, it's been a couple years now, 3, 4, 5. I see some male children. There shouldn't be any. So the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. So now they're making this up because they don't want to do what the man said. And they don't want to be replaced with other midwives who will do it. So their thought is, let's just come up with a story. They just give birth so fast. Like we can't even, So by the time they cry out and we run down the street and get there, they've already given birth. And Pharaoh went, oh, and believe that. Okay. So they're lying. God's not angry with them because they did not know what else to do. It's not like, so I'm not saying it's correct to lie. I'm just saying they didn't know what else to do. Their motives were correct. They're making up a story because they know we can't kill these children, and they didn't see another option other than making up a story. So they did. So in verse 20 it says, therefore God dealt well with the midwives. So this is interesting. Um, Now, had they been steeped in the history of the Bible and had gone to Sunday school every week and all this stuff, they might have said, you know what, I'm just going to tell the truth and see what happens because I trust God. But that's not what they had learned. They learned that the end justifies the means and that sort of thing. So they're doing the best from what they know, and God's merciful looking at their hearts. They're well intentioned. They're saying, I'm not going to go against God. I am going to keep these children alive. So God dealt well with the midwives. He's not rewarding their lying. He's rewarding their intentions, which is to make sure these children lived. And so God looks at us at different phases of our lives and says, okay, that's all that you know. You're doing the best you can in what you know. So I'm not mad at you. We can look back and go, oh, now I've grown. I've learned more. I wouldn't have done it that way. But God was merciful. God didn't strike me down. But then when we look back, we don't go, oh, well, I got away with it then. I'll just keep doing it. Well, no, because now you know better. So if you know better, you have to do better. But when you don't know better, God's not mad at you. So because he's looking at you, what is your intention? So it says, God dwelt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. So again, every time Pharaoh tries to do something, they just keep growing more because that's what the devil can't stop us. Let's stop being afraid of the devil. And so it was because the midwives feared God that he provided households for them, meaning he gave them children. He blessed them. So these were the women who didn't have families, who now had families. Because God could see, look what they're doing. They're doing the right thing. So he's blessing them. So that was God's signal to them. You did the right thing in not killing these children. So it says in verse 22, so Pharaoh commanded all of his people. So this is phase 4 of how I'm going to stop the Israelites from multiplying in Egypt. I tried to get the Hebrew wives, midwives to do something. So now I'm putting out an edict saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So now this is an edict. If you hear of any, not that you're supposed to just take it upon yourself as personal vigilanteism and run around, because there was no reward for it, but there was punishment for those who were caught having sons. If you hear a male child cry, if you hear, if you're a baby cry, go and see if it's a male or female, and if you see it, cast it into the river. This is the Nile River, and he's saying, I'm turning that river into blood. I'm going to turn the Nile River into blood, the blood of these babies, these male children. And some of them may have gone ahead and done that, right? So, because Moses, when Moses was born, it was a real thing. Moses is a male child, and his mother was in honest fear for his life, and she went ahead and put him in the ark. The basket, the name for the basket is the ark, just like Noah in the ark. It's the same word, um, and had him float down the river because this was a real edict and there was real fear. So there were babies, unfortunately, probably Israelite babies that were killed and thrown into the Nile River, and it was turned into blood. And I say that because later, when Moses comes back and God says, we're going to turn the river into blood, God, that's not arbitrary. That's not just a weird thing. God didn't, he's punishing Egypt for what it did to the Israelites. Each of these plagues, each of these things are not punishment that God just said, oh, you know what? I think I'll just send a bunch of bees. It was all related to their gods and their sin and what they had done. He's showing them, he's giving them repercussions of their sin. And so the first thing he's doing when God comes down is to turn that river into blood, because that's what Pharaoh had done. He turned the Nile River into blood with the lives of these Israelite children. Okay, so that's the end of the first chapter. And this is again this Pharaoh does not know Joseph, because he's an Egyptian Pharaoh. It's Ramesses, 19th dynasty. We know exactly when it happened. We go into history books. It's there. We know the years that all this was taking place, around 1300 or so BC, and the children of Israel are about to come out. So all this is documented. The Bible's not a myth. It's a true story. So thank you. I'm going to stop here, and then next week we'll go on to Exodus chapter 2. And again, happy Easter to everybody. The same sort of deliverance that Moses provided for the children of Israel and bringing them out of bondage to Egypt, that's what Jesus did for us on the cross when he brought us out from under bondage to sin. We're no longer bondage to sin and death, hell, and the grave. They have no more power over us. But it's up behooves us. We have to come out of Egypt. We have to accept it. We have to cross the Red Sea and receive the blessing that God has for us. But it's there. His arms are open, waiting to give us his blessing. All right. So thank you for watching today. Again, happy Easter. And I'll see some of you on Wednesday night. We're in the book of John, and the rest I'll see you again next Sunday for Exodus chapter 2.